So today, we continued with our series, our look at the book of James. And our reading from the letter of James this morning shares the advice with us that as Christians, we should show our good life, that our works are done with a gentleness that is born of wisdom. That our service in this world should be done with a gentleness that is born of wisdom. I like that assertion. I agree with that assertion. It is practical, it is pragmatic, that our good life, or we could say our Christian witness, or our testimony, that those pieces of us that are in the world is reflected through our good works that are done with a gentleness born of wisdom. Now that makes very good sense to me, but here's the thing, it's not very catchy. It's not very catchy in terms of getting the community all whipped up and excited, and it lacks some of the animated metaphors that you can use when you're preaching from like different letters of Paul, when he talks about like putting on the armor of God and going out into the world with our sword of truth, or going into battles against the evil of the world, or any of those languages where you could kind of personify evil as something that you can do battle against the devil and demons. And in our modern society, we love the idea of heroes and superheroes, and that we ourselves are the superheroes in our own story, that we're going to come up against the insurmountable odds of evil in the world, and we're going to be victorious. We want to be part of that Christian community that is willing to just take up that sword, to put on our breastplate and our helmet and go out into the world and make a difference. That's the kind of language that allows us to get all excited and whip up a congregation to action. But it is not what James is advising here. He is speaking of works of service that you do day after day after day after day, that you do them consistently and you do them with gentleness. In James's theology, that external battle with evil or the devil, or however we're going to define that, in James's theology, that has already been won through Jesus' resurrection. The important part for him now is that we as Christians live with integrity. That we get to a point where we just let go of earthly wisdom that inevitably weighs us down with selfish interests, and instead we embrace a more heavenly wisdom. That if there's a battle to be fought now, it's a battle for self-awareness and self-control, the things that become the hallmarks of our heavenly wisdom. Now, as we mentioned over the last few weeks, as we've engaged with the book of James, there is almost this perceived dichotomy between the way James speaks, or James' theology, and Paul, particularly around the idea of salvation by faith or salvation by works. Now, obviously, there's a bit of dichotomy in their rhetoric, but to say that it's an actual dichotomy, or they're actually talking about two different things, is a bit false. Of when we read the book of James and it makes us anxious, that kind of comes out of, as Reverend Bill mentioned, our tradition through Martin Luther, who was so focused on the idea of by faith alone, and that was important to him at the time, because part of Luther's issues, as we know, was with the Roman Catholic Church, who at that point insisted that they were the only ones who could control salvation. And if we're kind of stuck in that same place as Luther was at that point, then we miss what James is talking about in terms of works. James says that we don't work our way into salvation, or we don't work our way into heaven. Our works are a sign of our faith. And it is that integration of our faith into our actions of our everyday lives that makes a difference. Integration is what matters in terms of wisdom to James. We do good works of service because we believe. It is our amen response to God's grace that was given to us. And our faith is not just something that we talk about. It's not something that we do on Sundays. Our faith is something that we live. And the signs of maturity, such as self-awareness and self-control, allow us to even more deeply integrate that faith into how we live. That's what James would call wisdom. And we are learning each day how to integrate or embrace that divine perspective rather than relying on our more short-sighted human perspectives. But again, as I mentioned, gentle acts of service are not media sexy as a rally cry to the spiritual battlefield. But for us, for Christian community, living our faith in a hurting world, in a hurting world that can sometimes even be a hostile world, gentle acts of service are essential. And here's why I think they're essential. I think they're essential because they're relational. We don't need to pound each other with our beliefs. We don't need to shame each other into what you're doing is wrong and what I'm doing is right. We don't need to score points against one another. What we are called to do as a church is to love one another. And we know that loving one another is so much more than just simply being nice. Our gentleness is not about some sort of sappy niceness. Our gentleness of good works is about our maturity as Christians to care for one another with a practical love, and we do it day after day after day after day, consistently, because it's relational and the person you serve is a beloved person of God. And as I said, that may not be exciting, but it is a gentleness that makes a difference. And I kind of wanted to share a story with you this morning, and it's a story that someone told me. A gal that I've known for my whole life used to work in the shelter system. And she worked in a shelter, women's shelter in downtown Toronto for many, many years, often working with some of the hardest cases that would just break your heart. And I don't know how familiar some of you might be with such establishments, but they can be at times chaotic. You put a number of strangers who have suffered heartbreaking trauma, whose futures are uncertain for them and their children, and you stick them into a confined space, and I'm telling you, there will be tension. Tension which sometimes you add physical illness or mental illness into, and that tension can sometimes just erupt. So my friend told me that if she came on shift and she felt that tension in the air rising and rising, she would immediately do two things. One, she would change the radio station to classical music, despite some protests to the contrary. She would change the radio station. And then two, she would pull out the baking stuff, the ingredients, and she'd start making a pie. And between the soft and soothing music and the smells of fresh baked goods, you would find the tension and the atmosphere calm, just down. The tension would de-escalate. And it was the gentleness of the approach that would make a difference that day for those women in that shelter. In ministry, we talk about being a non-anxious presence. It's part of good pastoral care, that we allow people to talk and to feel, and we give them a safe space for that to happen. There's nothing rocket science about it. It's practical and it's pragmatic. It's using the wisdom that comes from our maturity in being a Christian. Heavenly wisdom, or godly wisdom, as James would call it. So, my friends, I would urge you to continue being the kind and loving community that you are. That you integrate your faith into your actions as you welcome and bless all whom God brings our way. Continue to be kind, to integrate your faith, and welcome and bless. Our good life, or our Christian witness, or our testimony, however we want to describe it, our witness in the world is reflected through our good works that are done with a gentleness born of wisdom. And no one is likely to knock down our doors or knock on our doors asking to make a movie of our lives. But that's okay. That's okay. We have a fine life together. And we have the opportunity to serve God in amazing ways right here and right now. So may God grant us the courage and wisdom to continue to grow and to be the Christians that God desires for us to be. As we say, thanks be to God. Amen.